welcome to the Wise Owl Talks. And let me start by just introducing you to the viewers and listeners a little bit before we dive into the conversation, right? So, friends, Simrita Dhir is a Duke of Edinburgh Gold Standee Awardee. She received her doctorate in American Literature from the Department of English and Cultural Studies, Punjab University, Chandigarh, which coincidentally happens to be my university as well. And she now lives with her husband and their son in San Diego, California, where she studied advanced rhetoric at the Department of Rhetoric and Writing Studies, San Diego State University. She lectures on writing, diversity, and imagination, and has to her credit 2 books. One is called The Rainbow Acres, and her latest book is The Song of Distant Bulbuls, right? And today we are going to be talking about this book, The Song of Distant Bulbuls. So welcome on the show, Simrita, and tell us a little about this book, because when I was looking at the blurb of the book, what it said was that it's been inspired by true events. So can you just tell us what sort of inspired you to write this book and how you wove together real life events into, the fictional narrative that you put together?
So first, thank you, Rachna, for that wonderful welcome. Such a delight to be joining you today. And it's a wonderful spring day. Now is evening time for us, but it was a beautiful April day today. So today I'm going to be talking about my novel, The Song of Distant Bulbuls. And the novel has been published very sensitively by Speaking Tiger Books. So to answer your question, Rachna, the story is inspired by a deeply personal story from my own family. But even though it has been inspired by real life events, I want to mention here that this is entirely a work of fiction. So it is not a memoir, it's a novel. And I situated the novel in the time period that it took place, which to me is such a fascinating period in history, that time period. So the novel unfolds in the year 1946. The Second World War has come to an end. It has been a few months since the Second World War is over. And then the Indian national movement is now at its peak. So here we are introduced to Sammi. In the opening chapter, we introduced Sammi. She was married at the age of 17 years to an officer in the British Indian Army. And only 21 days after her marriage, she was separated from her husband because he went to fight in the Southeast Asian theater of the war. And now it's going to be nearly 7 years. So in this January of 1946, they're only a few months away, and soon it will be 7 years that he has been born. So how I try to present it was that here we notice the agony of Sammi, how it's rising and mounting by the day. And then parallel to that is the Indian national movement, which is also rising. So we see the anguish of the country, we see the anguish of this young woman who has been waiting for her husband for 7 years. So this was obviously one of the most devastating periods in world history. So many people were impacted by the Second World War. And then here was my, attempt to take the reader into the rural backwaters of Punjab and show how in that faraway village, so far away from the theaters of the war, somebody is impacted by the deep ramifications of the war and is waiting for her husband now nearly for 7 years.
Right, that sounds good. So like you said, your novel is set against the backdrop of Indian independence and the turbulence of pre-partition India and all that. Obviously, you were born much, much after partition. So how did you, research? You would have had to get into the historical, cultural nuances of that time, which you've not lived through, basically. So how did you manage to do your research? What were the books you went back to, and especially the rural background that you're talking about? Because most of us are not really connected to the rural background because we have been born and brought up in an urban kind of a setup. So how did you connect that, and how did you empathize with that enough to be able to, draw up a framework that talked about all this?
Sure, that's a great question, Rachna. So, talking about obviously the fact that I was born many decades after Indian independence. My mother too was born in independent India. So it took extensive amount of research. And, I am a student of literature. I'm also a student of history. So I was really conscious of this, that at no point should history be misappropriated or misrepresented. So obviously I researched extensively about the time period modern India. This time period is one of my favorite phases in history. So I have been exploring it since I was a teenager, but for the purpose of writing this novel, I explored it extensively. I read a lot of books pertaining to this time period. I also explored oral narratives, and I drew from memory and family stories to put together this narrative. Talking about rural India, so rural India was really interesting at that point in time on the brink of independence. So this is a village that falls under the princely state of Patiala. So the Patiala Riyasat, as we know, was like a huge Riyasat. Yes, it went far beyond the outskirts of the city of Patiala. So this village falls under the Patiala Riyasat, and I researched about princely India of the time period, how, all of these villages that fell into the Patiala Riyasat, what was their culture, what was their lifestyle like, the people in the villages. And, because this is my ancestry from both my father and my mother's side, they are from that area where the novel is situated. So I obviously drew from family stories and oral narratives to be able to, bring back that era for the reader. And talking to both my grandmothers since childhood, not just in preparation for this novel, but just talking to both my maternal and paternal grandmothers, learning about the area because this is my ancestral area. So I had a lot of curiosity about it. And then obviously always the attempt was that nothing should be misrepresented. So even during the time that I was writing the novel, I did tour the area. Though things are a lot different now, 75 years after Indian independence. But the river is there, the fields are the same, and many things are still the same, even though a lot has changed. Yes. So it was beautiful to travel back in time to be able to recreate that culture, that scene, the scenario, and just it was a passion that led me to do it. Just the same as one sits down to write a story. I mean, nobody tells you to write a story. When you sit down to write it, you're just driven by this passion. You don't know where it's going to go. Will you ever finish the story? Will anybody read it? How will people respond to it? I mean, these are all questions that are lingering in the air, but it's as though you're driven by a force. And at that point, you want to do everything that you can possibly do to write a comprehensive story. So political history is obviously important. It's deeply important. It forms the backdrop of the narrative, but social, cultural, economic history, that is equally as important, particularly social history and how people behaved, how they spoke to each other, how the children behaved with their parents, how did young girls behave, how weddings took place, what they wore. So I had to do a lot of research, Rachna, but it was a labor of love. At no point did I feel, oh, I'm tired, or it was, like I said, just driven by this passion. And I was really happy with how Ravi Singh at Speaking Tiger, how he approached the book and how he upheld it, and he was really sensitive to the story. So at that point I knew that now the book is in good hands and we are moving forward.
Sounds good. But certainly, as you said, needs a lot of research, because to give the story credibility, you need to make sure that the right political, philosophical, cultural, and geographical nuances are in place. So So let's move to the characterization that you've done. Your main character, your protagonist, is Sami. And her journey, of course, is a long journey. And while you are, talking about her, or sort of while her character unfurls, we are also exploring deep philosophical questions, about love, about happiness, the various themes that you've woven into your narrative. So what message do you hope the readers will take away from your book? Or is it that you feel that it is not the author who should be giving out any messages? It's an organic thing which is happening, when you're writing a book. How do you look at it?
Yeah, so both things are true, Rachna. At a level, when you're writing, at that point, I mean, obviously, I have been a scholar. I have been working for my PhD. I am familiar with philosophies. I'm also familiar with styles of writing and the many philosophies that come into play when we read literature. But at that point, when you're writing, I try to be just a storyteller. At that point, I try to leave behind all the knowledge that I may have of any kind of literary theory or philosophy. At that point, the goal is to tell an intriguing story. That is my foremost goal, because at that point, I just want to leave ideology behind and present an intriguing story. But, having said that, it is a post-colonial narrative. It talks about the struggle of colonized people in the face of colonialism, because so much has been written. Reams have been written already about, the Allied success in the Second World War, all the things that they did in the various theaters of the war. But at no point has it been mentioned that there was a tremendous sacrifice made by 2.5 million Indians who fought in the various theaters of the war. So really, there's now an attempt to make a dent in the meta-narrative, to say, it's really time that we bring forth our stories of the colonized people. We want to bring forth our stories to the forefront. They have been for far too long submerged and marginalized, and we want to give voices to all of those people from that colonial period who have been forgotten in the meta-narrative, the grand narrative of the colonizer. So this was obviously my attempt to make a dent in the single story, and my hope is really that at some point, any reader who's reading the book, no matter where they're situated on the map, I hope they will begin to question that single story that has been imposed upon us for so long, because a single story is at best an incomplete story. At worst, it speaks of tyranny and oppression and domination. So really, my one point is that people will awaken to the truth and try to look for their own stories that have not been presented in history. And they will look back at their own cultures, their own families, their own civilizations, and look for all of those voices that have been for far too long muted and marginalized.
Yes. That sounds like a good, very laudable kind of a message that you're sending out. People should find their voices and look for their own story in, the story that you've woven. Yes, I totally agree. Absolutely. So now let's move a little to the backdrop of Sami, the central character. You've set her in this village called Aliwala, right? And you've described that as a hamlet with Sufi bearings. Now, Sufism has been, of course, a very important part of the cultural heritage in India, especially in Punjab. So could you just elaborate on the significance of this setting and its reflection of Punjab's diverse cultural fabric for our viewers?
Yes. So really now, this is another aspect of forgotten history. Like a lot of people have forgotten how secular the setup was at that time in pre-partition Punjab. So talking about Sufism had been around for the longest time. And this particular village, Aliwala, the patron saint of this village is the great Sufi master, Ali Hujweri, popularly known as Data Ganj Baksh. So he was a contemporary of Mahmud Ghazni, and he came to live in Lahore in the 11th century, the same time as Mahmud Ghazni, yes. So he was known as Data Ganj Baksh, meaning somebody who is a bestower of bounties, somebody who can give you anything that you desire. And there is the great shrine of Ali Hujweri in the city of Lahore. But here in this tiny village, the founder of this village, Ali, he had gone to Lahore and visited the shrine. And he was so enamored of, this aura of the shrine that he decided to set up a shrine for Ali Hujweri in his own village. So in this village, we noticed that there is obviously the Sufi shrine, and they pay homage to the patron saint every autumn during his anniversary. They pay homage to the Sufi saints. There's singing, there's dancing, there's rejoicing, they make food at that autumnal festival every year during his anniversary. But on top of that, there is obviously a gurdwara, there is a temple, there is also a mosque, which is really to say that this is a beautiful facet of secular India that we see on the brink of partition. And everybody, lived in harmony. Obviously, from time to time, there would be one altercation or other, but it would frizzle out. But really now, again, to talk about the designs of the colonizer, how the communal divide was built up by the British, how the communities were pitted against one another, how that eventually led to the partition of the country, particularly the partition of Punjab, which was such a beautiful place prior to the partition. It was referred to as the Punjab, meaning it was that formidable frontier. This was something the British called the Punjab. Unlike other areas, it was referred to as the Punjab. And then for it to be split like that, and the name itself refers to 5 beautiful rivers. And today we do not have 5 beautiful rivers in either of the Punjabs, neither in East Punjab nor in the West. So really now, that name, Land of 5 Rivers, even that the context that is associated with the name has been eroded. So Yeah, so really, this was to celebrate the secular heritage of Punjab, how people lived peacefully, how everybody paid homage at the shrine during the autumnal festival. And then, to have a shrine for the Sufi saint is one thing, but throughout the novel, we notice that characters at various pivotal moments in the story, they will rise and exhibit Sufi tendencies, sometimes at moments that it is least expected of them. So all of them exhibit Sufi tendencies. Sammi is the chief protagonist of the story. She's central to the narrative. She exhibits the two strong Sufi tendencies of Bagavat and Ishq. Both of those are manifested in her personality. And then her brother Jasjeet, he manifests another facet of Sufism, which is this selfless service for nation, for family, for community. So he is responsive to everything that's happening around him. And then her other brother, Kirpal, who, sets out on this quest for land, who seems at times a really callous person. But then there is this moment in the story when he falls in romantic love. At that point, he also manifests Sufi tendencies of tolerance and acceptance. So romantic love brings out some really beautiful facets in him. And then there is another character in the story, Bachchan Singh. So when readers will encounter him for who he truly is, he also presents to us this beautiful aspect of Sufiyana Ishq that he professes to practice. And then, two other characters in the novel, Jiti Bua, Sammi's paternal aunt, and Bapuji, Sammi's father, both of them also in their kindness and their benevolence and their stoicism and an acceptance of life. They also manifest Sufi tendencies. So at pivotal moments in the story, we notice how various characters exhibit Sufi tendencies, sometimes to the surprise of the readers.
Yeah. In fact, that's quite true. Pre-partition, we had these secular spaces everywhere, where there was no polarization along religious lines. And it is like, there was another memoir I had read of M.K. Raina, who wrote a memoir on his Kashmiri antecedents, and he also talked about these secular spaces, which sadly, seem to have gone missing now. But I guess that's a subject for another kind of a discussion. So let me move on to the next question then. You've talked about Aliwala, that is Punjab, and that kind of a setup. But you've also talked about the World Wars, the Second World War, and the war front, basically, so which are geographically very different locations. So how have you sort of created a cohesion, and brought this narrative together despite the different geographical locations that you are touching within the framework of your narrative?
Yeah, so the novel spans across rural Punjab, then the princely city of Patala, and then obviously the Southeast Asian capital of the war. So when we are in rural Punjab, we encounter Sammi, and we encounter the families of Sammi and Hari Singh. We also learn about the agrarian way of life in Punjab, how seasons, how the natural elements, whether it's the river or rain or sunshine, how integral they are to the life of the farmers. Just learning about their way of life, the changing seasons, the sowing of crops, the harvesting of crops, the festivals, all of that is presented. So my attempt was that, this would be a good way to introduce the reader to the social norms, the lifestyle of the people in Punjab. And then Sammi's brother Jasjeet, who is also an integral character in the story, many chapters in the novel have been presented from his perspective, is this young man who leaves the village to go and study in the city. So he has been living in the city for nearly 7 years now. So the princely city of Patiala, which was one of the most affluent princely states, Patiala, at that point in time, yes. So Maharaja Bhupinder Singh being one of the most wealthiest, he was one of the wealthiest, the most wealthy men in the world at that time. So, here was a guy who had like a fleet of Rolls Royce cars, we had helicopters and so forth. He was the largest client of Cartier back in the day. So we get glimpses of the princely city of Patiala. So we know that the princely cities, like all other princely places, Patiala was also aligned with the British. But we notice that even in that setup, they are not oblivious to what's happening in the nation. And the Indian national movement is rising. So even the city of Patiala, we notice that a lot of young people, particularly at the Maharaja's College, the professors, the students, now they are catching the fever. of nationalism. They no longer want to align with the British. And so this is everywhere. There is a looming talk about the partition of the country, and also the Indian national movement is at its peak. So here in the city of Patiala, also we see secular faces of pre-partition India. Jasjeet's professor and mentor is professor named Shaukat Rahman, who is a liberal intellectual. And he has his own take on the partition. They have interesting perspectives about Jinnah and why he chose to do what he did. So we do see the face of urban intelligentsia when we go to the city of Patiala, and we learn about Jasjeet and his life over there in the city. And we learn how urban folk are responding to the conversations about independence and partition. And then, you know, because Sami's husband, Hari Singh, is fighting in the Southeast Asian theater of the war, we go across borders and nations and rivers, and we go into the Southeast Asian theater. So first, Hari Singh takes us through his letters to the Malayan campaign where he fought in that region, and then eventually how he saw action in the pivotal Battle of Singapore. So, so my attempt was that we would see the turmoil, the unrest, the turbulence at the level of rural India and then pan-India through Jasjeet, when we learn about urban India and the response of urban people to the Indian national movement and the talk about partition. And then eventually at an international level, talking about the Southeast Asian theater of the war and the pivotal Battle of Singapore. This was a historic battle with unexpected outcomes, that particular battle, the Battle of Singapore. And a lot of people participated in that battle. It was led obviously by the British, but there were soldiers fighting from India. Australia. There were Indian personnel who were fighting, and obviously there were British personnel. So a lot of people were fighting in that pivotal Battle of Singapore. So talking about that battle was an interesting facet, also trying to present it from the perspective of the colonized people and eventually how they had to bear the brunt of the outcome of the battle.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. So the title of your book, now let's go to the title of that's a little intriguing, and perhaps there might be a tale behind this, a story behind this. The Song of Distant Bulbuls. Why the Song of Distant Bulbuls?
So bulbuls, as we know, are songbirds in India, in Punjab. Even today, there are a lot of bulbuls. So this title, it alludes to obviously the beauty of Punjab, the resilience of Punjab, and then, you know, Hari Singh and Sami, they bond over the Song of the Bulbuls. When they are newly married, they bond over the Song of the Bulbuls. And then, of course, as we know, he goes to fight in the war, and only 21 days after their marriage. And then afterwards, through the length of the novel, it's as though Sami can hear the song, but the song is always distant. Because, you know, just as happiness has come to elude her, and she has to undergo this time of, you know, of separation and virag. So in the same way, she can hear the bulbuls, but like I said, it's always distant in her mind. It's very far away, just as happiness has come to elude her. And so through to the end of the novel, it's always as though the song is playing in the background. And then in many of his letters, Hari Singh mentions the Song of the Bulbuls. At one point, he also talks about the monogamous nature of bulbuls, how bulbuls have just one mate for life. Really talking about how their love is eternal and long-lasting, and that it can endure any kind of hardship, whether it's a war or distance or separation. So the song really sustains Sami over a period of time, just as Hari Singh's letters sustain her over a length of 7 years. So the song evokes obviously resilience, perseverance. It's not just Sami's resilience, it's also the resilience of Punjab at that pivotal moment in history. It's also the resilience of India in the face of the colonizer and the eventual struggle to drive out the colonizer.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful title for a beautifully put together book. And right, it's like the Song of the Bulbul, as you said, is synonymous with resilience of, you know, the people of India, of India itself as a geographical unit and all that. So we are running out of time, Simrita. So let me start winding up with one last question. Are you working on another project? And if you are, would you like to share some details about it?
So, Rachna, always stories are spinning in my mind. Oh, I have always so many stories to tell and share. But
Yeah.
right now will be a little bit early to talk about the next work. But if we have a couple of minutes, I can read out a page or so from the spring section of the book because this is spring season now. But if you want, we can skip it, how
Or
we like.
not a page maybe, but a paragraph would do beautiful.
Sure, definitely. I will read from the spring section. So this
Yes.
is page 127. I'm going to read a quick paragraph.
Yes.
So spring, and this particular chapter is Sammi. Sammi clutched the basketful of gourds and began running home just as soon as the first raindrops hit her forehead and started trickling down her cheeks. The harvest festival Vaisakhi was around the corner. Farmers were walking about smiling in gratitude for the lustrous golden wheat, whispering thanks to the skies for their prayers answered and their hard work rewarded. A smug delightfulness hung in the air, shoots of wildflowers erupting out of nowhere to glitter the meadows, a fragrant breeze blowing all day long, heralding lingering days and palmy nights. Spring had brought along myriad gifts, a bountiful wheat harvest, as also a bevy of colorful vegetables like gourds, tomatoes, beets, and brinjals. And now an unexpected shower of rain had come to dim the sun, dampening the air and hushing the birds.
Ah, that's beautiful. Very visually riveting, in fact, very cinematic in tone, the narrative. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right.
So it was lovely talking to you, Simrita, about your book, and we wish you all the best in all your creative endeavors. We hope the next books come along soon and they're as beautiful as this one. So thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much.
joining us here.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachna. It was such a delight to converse with you today. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.